I do love writing that really has a very strong sense of place. And the books that I'm going to talk about today all feature, to a greater or lesser extent, islands, but they all connect in some way about or around this idea of how place is so integral to the way the story unfolds. The first book I'd like to talk about is Sinead Gleason's Hagstone. Hagstone, those stones you find washed up on the beach, sometimes they've got a little, perfect little hole in them. Old Irish myth and even contemporary sort of witchcraft says that, you look through the hole and you'll see the world differently, or you'll be cured of something. Natural phenomenon. Let's give it the weirdest possible explanation. Gleason is an Irish writer. This is her first novel. Has written a memoir and essays. She sets her novel on a unnamed, unspecified location on the Irish coast, and it's removed from the normal from the mainland. It's got a very small community. And one of these, the character we're most interested in, and I found her very interesting. I found Nell, her main character, as wild and as elemental as the island itself. Nell is an alternative artist, sort of following the kind of works that she references at the end of a book of Maggie Hamblin or Louise Bourgeois, working with sort of what nature provides, doing temporary structures, installations, very unusual thinking. And this young woman is also a tour guide on the island and is considered by the locals to be a bit of a weirdo. And she is unto herself. She is both a law unto herself, and she is equal unto herself. She seems to have very few needs, but she does set her sights on a young man who has come back to the island, Cleary, who she kind of almost stalks in a way, and decides that she'd rather like to see what a relationship with him would be. It's a very small part of the narrative, the main focus being one of two things. There's this, she's drawing on legend, this sonic boom or hum or noise that people do or don't hear on the island, and it's mostly the women who do. So we're looking at women being more closely connected to nature and to the supernatural. And there is how this affects the islanders themselves is interesting. And then there's a group of women living in Rathglass, which is a sort of a reinvented stately home castle thing, where they're called the Inians, which is the Irish for daughter. And you get a feeling that it's kind of a cross between a sort of cult and a retreat for women who've had traumatic experiences in their lives, and they hear about this place and they come, and they're presided over or watched over by Maman. And I think all of this is a nod to woman as maiden mother and eventually hag, which is quite clever. It's very wild, it's that book that if you want something a bit sort of gothic-y, with a very strong female character, and goes to places, linked with ritual and Samhain and why women leave the world. So we're not looking at trauma directly. And where this could go to, it's a bit of a wild ride, a bit mental in places and elemental in others. And all in all, paced quite fast. I mean, Nell has to go up to this place to document the lives and of these women, and she has in her past had, connection with writing a kind of a female Bible. So there's a very feminist thread going through it. But I think there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of links to folklore. So all in all, a great one. Very much enjoyed that. Another island novel, very different pace. We've got from Joanna, Glen, which is, and all of these titles are so similar. So we've got Maybe, Perhaps, Possibly. Joanna Glen I have known, I mean, I've loved her first two novels, All My Mothers, and the one before that, which was The Other Half of Augusta Hope, which was a shortlist for the Costa. Um, and always does human drama with great tenderness and very uplifting stories. And this one is no different. Pacing is slightly different in that it's sort of slower, but it's like watching something grow or cook. It's quite detailed in that sense. We set over 3 years from 2017 to 2019. We have two young people, youngish, who the author herself sort of, calls them broken. And I'm interested in this idea of what is brokenness and what is, and why we'd use that term particularly. But it's how they are not really, how coincidentally they come together. They're two young people. Saul is a young man whose mother has just died, and he's kind of following. She's interested in what we call thin places. So we have this thread from these two books of sort of these wild places where this world and the next world might be thin. And he sort of wants to go to these places to kind of honor her and to see what her fascination was. And now that she's dead, he's particularly interested in going there. And Saul has a family. His father's a vicar, and you feel that love was hard for him to come by, and he got it from his mother in spades, but his father was distant and, though not cruel, seemed to have withheld love from him. And then we have Addie. Addie lives on this island. I think it's set on the Farne Islands, which are out on the northeastern coast of England, so out in the North Sea. And these are very famous islands. I mean, they're real for bird watching and puffin colonies. But the two islands that are mentioned, Ora and Rokesby, which are connected by a little causeway, and this is sort of a feature of how these two young people do and don't sort of get to each other. So everything is very tenuous in their sort of their establishing their threads. Those islands are not real. Anyway, Addie is living on one of these islands with her mother, and you get a vague picture. She has a brother, Sidney, with whom she has very, very poor relationship, and her father and Sidney mostly go to the mainland because they want to try, and the father's always looking for work, always looking for new projects, seems to be a little bit of a sort of a butterfly. And the mother runs this retreat house for women. Got to keep them safe. And Addie seems to be the one who's doing all the work, but the mother does have this sort of wing clipping effect on Addie. So these two young people are going to meet because Sol has come here because it's a thin place. Addie is here because she's caught by her mother. And the one thing Addie does do is swim. And there's lots of fun. I mean, Glen puts in sort of, she has Addie wearing a little mermaid dress because she's a pretty good swimmer. And if you put her in like a mermaid thing, she could do synchronized mermaid swimming and make a lot of money. And Addie is sort of always looking for, is this a fair deal I have with my mum? She does all the cooking, all the cleaning, and she's very good at all of this. She does a lot of needlework. She's a very gifted young woman, has no classical education, whereas Sol is a teacher. These two young people are going to meet and pull apart and meet and pull apart. But I think what I loved about this, about their relationship, is that they are both young people who aren't takers. They're not going to, they don't even know if they deserve to find somebody else. And maybe they don't. And maybe it's not going to work. But Glen builds this in a way where all through it, you're not very sure. And she even punctuates, I think about 10 or 11, she invites us out of the narrative to kind of look at how can this work? Who are these young people? If you've read her before, you know that you're never going to be totally devastated. She's always got something lovely. Things may not always go the way everybody wants, but it's a very, very beautiful, slow, dreamy, all about the human emotion read. Very, very lovely. A few little surprises, but it's well worth the investment in that story. And the last one, where I thought landscape was an absolute knockout, is Liz Moore's recent one, which is the God of the Woods. Now, she was a best-selling author of Long Bright River, has several novels to her name. This one is set in the Adirondack Mountains, and it's set between the 1950s and about 1975. And where this could have been sort of like, there's time hopping going on, and it's absolutely essential because every time she time hops, goes back to the 50s or goes back to the 60s, because the main events occur in the 50s when the story is set up, the 60s when the first main event happens, and then the current time frame with sort of 5 or 6 days within each of those that we're interested in. Every single time she time hops or goes back, it's then either confirming something that's been discovered in the current frame or time frame, or it's giving us new information to help build. And goodness, it's a masterpiece of plotting. And at the beginning of each chapter, there's a very clever thing there. They're all the years and all of the days, so that it's sort of italicized or brought up in a dark font. Oh yeah, I'm in this time frame. So you've got a very quick, which is rather nice to the reader. You don't have to figure it out. It's actually laid out very well for you because it does get complex. And a complex read is so rewarding. This one was very rewarding. It's a thriller. There is a Van Laar family who live in these mountains, and they live in a very sort of secluded spot, but they have this famous camp that was set up in the 50s when the first Van Laar, Peter Van Laar the first, and there are 4 of them, had set up a camp, or had eventually, that's what his plan was, to set up a camp for the children of the bourgeoisie, they'd have to be really, or even upper middle classes or upper classes of American society, where the children come to this Camp Emerson and they learn survival skills. They learn all sorts of things about being an age. And then there's a sort of a camp where they go out into the wilderness and have to survive for 2 days. And this has over time become more supervised than less, that you want to keep our little darlings safe. And part of the reason possibly for this is that in the 1950s we have Alice, who's a young woman who has met the third Peter Van Laar and has been selected as a wife for him and has produced a son, also Peter, but they call him Bear, and she is very, very smitten with her son Bear. And in 1960s, 61, Bear disappears, has gone off for a walk with his grandfather and has never come back. And Alice is sort of grief-stricken, mostly kept on kind of calming medications, and lots of things happen. There's a camp director who knows the area really well, and we get to know the area quite well as well, who's sort of leading things. There are cops come in, the whole thing never found. Or at that point, that's what it looks like. And then we jump to the current day where the Van Laar have had a second child, Barbara. And again, love has been withheld, or nobody knows how to love her. And she's difficult. And she's a bit alternative. And when we meet her, she's decided she wants to go on this camp. So the camp supervisor is TJ, who's the daughter of the original camp supervisor, Vic, and this family is important. And there's a whole other narrative about what happens to Barbara, because Barbara also disappears. It's a page-turning thriller like no other. I mean, I couldn't, I'm not saying I read till dawn, because I can no longer really do that, but I found it gripping. I had no sort of issues with hopping around in time. There was a modern day detective, and we're still in the 1970s, who has become one of the first female detectives, and how she is kind of helped along by her colleagues, how this is actually quite healthy. But any good novel or thriller that's going to give you great pace, great story, great characters, a lot of twists, keeping you guessing all the time, is also going to be commenting the social issues of the time. And from the 50s to the 70s with the wealthy Americans, what a woman was supposed to do and what she was supposed to put up with and what she was for, as in breeding children and looking good and being able to host parties, if she was of that social class, is fundamental to this novel. And it's also fundamental to how we dealt with scandal. These are rich banking family. So how is scandal dealt with? How is anything that would bring you to the eyes of the media, how is the patriarchy dealt with, and how women in those days and right up to the 70s have got the women today, and this is what I think she's commenting, to a point of sort of freeing themselves from the constraints of what men think we should do and be. And now is not the time to be reneging on that. There's my political statement for the day. That's it. That's my lineup. 3 super books. The landscape absolutely has its hooks into you, and highly, highly, highly recommend all of those. I will see you again for another roundup as soon as I can get round to reading them. You can like and subscribe if it occurs to you or it pleases you. Otherwise, see you next time.